This is insane.
What the fuck kind of bug is that?
A eyelash bug. Ooh, this is I'm on fleek.
It looks just
Just got my lashes done in the club. Munchie, you.
Welcome back to Monster Mender. In this series, I analyze a monster from the Monster Hunter franchise, then redesign it in 3 different ways. The first will be close to the original design, just with some updates or tweaks. The second design will be a new take on the same concept, exploring other ways the ideas behind it could be represented. Finally, the third design will only take the most important aspect of the monster and find something totally new to do with it. The monster's role in the game will still be taken into consideration in each approach, which I think is an important part of their design rationale, both mechanically and visually. It also prevents me from making monsters I don't like into punching bags, and cranking up my favorites into apocalyptic elder-level threats. In this episode, we'll go over the gregarious gang leader, Gendrome. Gendrome has a lot in common with its cousin Velocidrome, so much that people say that it's not much else other than a green clone. This is, unfortunately, pretty much the truth as far as the fight is concerned. It has the exact same moveset of pounces and bites, with the only difference being that its fangs are now capable of inflicting paralysis. This relatively small mechanical divergence from Velocidrome informs a lot of the changes in the design of Gendrome that I think are genuinely quite interesting. The giant fangs hanging out of its mouth invoke the imagery of a snake, and a new player can immediately understand that they should be extra cautious of the business end of this monster. The fangs also, at least to me, look a lot like the long mustaches stereotypically associated with wise old Japanese men, signifying Gendrome as a leader that gets by on cleverness rather than brute strength.
Long before time had a name.
What's more, it is even scrawnier than Velocidrome, especially when it comes to the claws, which might seem like an odd choice for the more advanced version of a monster, but this is a choice more informed by Gendrome's ecology. Venomous predators don't need to waste valuable nutrients growing and carrying around heavy weaponry when their venom can do most of the work taking down prey for them. Gendrome keeps its hooked toe claw, even if reduced, because all it needs to do is hang on long enough for its paralyzing bite to take effect. Being energy efficient like this is important in the desert, especially because Gendrome don't have the stopping power to claim the best hunting grounds from their larger competitors, and they might need to go long distances to find something to eat. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to confirm this for myself, and information about small monsters like Genprey is hard to come by online. But many renders of Genprey show them having their eyes squinted. I assume that this is meant to represent that the Genprey are trying to protect their eyes from the bright desert sun, which would also add justification to the shape of their crests, which would shield them from direct light. This is also supported by the fact that their eyes are sometimes depicted as fully open. I assume that they do this when it's dark. This suggests that Gendrome and its underlings are probably active primarily at night, where their large eyes are more helpful. Being nocturnal not only makes it easier to hide from larger wyverns that would make a meal out of them, but also to sneak up on food and dispatch them before they can even put up a fight. As an added bonus, they get to avoid having to deal with the scorching desert heat. We can see from Gendrome that even in monsters that most would say are cheap clones for padding the roster, the designers behind the Monster Hunter games were putting just as much thought as they do with any of the larger, flashier wyverns that hunters are more excited about. This commitment to viewing the world of Monster Hunter as a living one is exactly what makes low-tier monsters like this my favorites. As I just discussed, Gendrome's game role and ecology are perfectly baked into its design, and the only visual changes I would want to make are ones that help it feel even more like a real creature that could exist. I would also hope that an updated Gendrome would get a few new attacks to help it feel like less of a repeat of the other raptors. It definitely deserves its own chance to shine, but that is more or less out of the scope of what I'm doing here. I spent a lot of time acknowledging the effort put into this monster, but just like the Velocidrome, its age really holds it back. Its proportions are just a bit too cartoonish for my tastes. It looks like it shouldn't even be able to hold its head up, so of course I wanted to tweak that a bit. Unlike in previous episodes, I had no paper sketches prepared when I was working on my Gendrome illustration, so my process for redesigning it is fully on display. One of the details I was considering was a small hood like a cobra's, to further tie Gendrome to the snakes that inform its design, though I actually decided against this, as I felt the hood offered enough possibilities that it would be a shame to use it on a monster that already had its own identity without it. I came to the conclusion that I could allow the tip of the snout to resemble a snake that mimics cobras as a defense mechanism, the hognose, just to add a touch more serpent to Gendrome without changing it too much. I also decided that it would make more sense for Gendrome's fangs to be folded back when not in use, again partially influenced by the way a viper's fangs swing forward when it goes in for a strike, but also because having exposed teeth like that, especially in the desert, leaves them vulnerable to drying out and becoming brittle. I chose to fold them along the lips rather than inside the mouth, because I thought it might help them more strongly resemble a mustache, which is a design detail I really like in the original, even if I'm not sure whether or not it was intentional. This also gives a bit of space for a unique idle animation where Genprey might lick their fangs, which would look like the skinny little monsters were constantly licking their lips hungrily. In the wide open spaces of the desert, this wyvern doesn't need brightly colored plates to help its pack keep track of it, so instead I chose to add in the sharp plates along its spine that the online version had, as I do feel that this was just a pinch of something extra that I was looking for. Perhaps I could have chosen a better pose to show off the scrawny monster Gendrome is supposed to be, but I felt that this agile stance gets the idea across just fine without doing so. I'm curious to know what you think about the changes though. Did Gendrome deserve more, or is this just the right amount? Ideas I had rejected as being too different for the first design informed a lot of this one, which I think highlights exactly why I chose to tackle this series in this way. The hood was one of them, and I knew I wanted to center this design around it. To do this, I expanded on the large external ears I gave my second Velocidrome design to form the structure of the hood, which would not only give them excellent hearing that would be helpful for reasons I will mention shortly, but also to make the hood stand out from the cobras it was inspired by. When I redesign monsters that are part of some kind of a set with some others, I like to keep that aspect, as the restrictions you put on a design are what will make it the most interesting, exactly the kind of philosophy that makes Monster Hunter design so compelling. The head of the Velocidrome that corresponds to this design was taking very explicit inspiration from snakes, and I decided that doing that for this Gendrome would not only make it too similar to its cousin, but also to the original Gendrome. Instead, I intentionally broke away from serpentine influence to keep this monster from just being a snake on legs, and instead I modeled the head off of another venomous reptile, the beaded lizard. They have a gnarly set of teeth in their jaws, as well as osteoderms that give them the unique texture for which they are named. I decided that these details made it the perfect creature to mix in order to make a venomous monster that stands out from all the others. Now, if you remember from episode 1, I wanted to focus the second Velocidrome design around kicking moves, like a secretary bird, and I wanted to keep up that theme with this Gendrome too, since I imagine they would share an animation rig just like the two monsters do in the existing games. Because of this, I decided that I would move the venom glands to the toe claws, instead of having the toxins delivered by the bite. The toe claws pull from scorpion stingers, which I think are a pretty appropriate thing to compare the Gendrome's fighting style to. Another influence that my Velocidrome had on this design was the fact that I planned for the animations to be reminiscent of a rooster, with its extravagant tail held tall and proud. I decided against giving this Gendrome feathers early on, to avoid it looking too similar to real-life dromaeosaurs. So I instead decided that the end of the tail would be a rattle that shook as the monster moved, which would help Genprey keep track of their leader even in sandstorms or pitch darkness, when even their excellent eyesight would fail them. In these circumstances, they rely on the excellent hearing granted to them by their hoods, which act like a radar dish and give them perhaps the best hearing of any monster. The rattle also lends itself to characterful telegraphs of its stings, like a rattlesnake's warning before a defensive strike. While I was working on the coloring, I let myself get carried away imagining how it might look in the intentionally extreme design style we see from the monsters in Wilds. And the impression I get is that the Forbidden Lands are to the rest of the Monster Hunter world what Australia is to the rest of Earth. The ecosystem seems so alien to many of us because the inhabitants have been isolated from the other landmasses for so long. I cannot wait to get my hands on it. Some of you might say that this is exactly what makes frontier monsters so intriguing. Now, what are you doing in my house? It's 3 a.m. And I would respond,
Don't fall asleep.
I decided to make the pattern of the hood very striking, but only after I had posed it to be facing away from the camera. Originally, the plan was to give it simple eye spots like a cobra, which I could do justice in the sketchy style on the Hunter's Notes page. I decided to turn this oversight into a chance to try out some of my new brushes, imagining that these sketches were made by a scholar, based on the illustration and reporting of field researchers. The scholar doesn't have expensive paints, so he just makes his own stains and dyes from plants he often requests hunter recruits to gather for him. So, next time you're groaning about having to do a gathering quest, just imagine you're doing it for me. One last thing for any other aspiring artists out there, I am really happy with this design, and it shows the value of iteration. Don't take the first idea you have at face value. Spending some time exploring options will always make your design better, even if you go in with an idea of what you want. I actually feel like I should have done more. It's a skill I and everyone else should always be sure to train whenever possible. I made sure to put in that note about iteration in the last design because this design went through plenty too, but they were mostly on paper where I can't record, so you won't get to see. In this design, I liked the idea of mimicking stereotypes of gangs from different cultures. My Velocidrome shares the pompadour with Japanese gangsters, and this one was inspired by the punk style, specifically by the spiky hair, piercings, and bright colors it's characterized by. Because the other two Gendrome had different methods of delivering their venom, I wanted to find a third for this design, as an extra challenge to myself. I landed on giving them quills like a porcupine, which are perfect for both offense and defense. Of course, no predator wants to risk getting a mouthful of painful, toxic spines, so the Genprey are free to mind their own business undisturbed. When on the hunt, Gendrome can whip its tail to launch these spines into their prey. This way, the target is left with an injury that can't heal as long as the spines are bouncing around and working their way deeper into the wound, all the while slowly releasing paralytic into the bloodstream. The quills are where the idea to style this monster after punks came from, and I ran with it from there. I gave this design nodules of keratin on their faces to mimic a nose ring and stud piercings. Thinking of a pierced septum also reminded me of the outright missing septum of turkey vultures, which, being a sort of nasty, bristly desert animal, felt like a perfect addition to the mix. So I gave the Gendrome huge nostrils that you can look right through. I wondered if having a face with great big holes in it might also impact its ability to work as a resonating chamber, perhaps making communicating with complex calls like the raptors typically do unviable. So, in exchange for an unmatched sense of smell, these Genprey can only vocalize with hollow hoots and wheezes. Instead, they do most of their talking through body language. I added a large extendable dewlap like the ones anoles have, brightly colored like a flag, so the Gendrome can communicate orders to its pack that way. It also serves the same purpose that it does on the lizards that inspired it, allowing dominant males to indicate their physical condition with its vividness. That way, they can avoid getting into fights and the risk of injury. I chose to make this interpretation of Gendrome's arms look more suited to manipulating objects than hunting, allowing them to act a lot like Kulu does in the New World. I don't intend for them to use tools in their fight though, that's Kulu's gimmick. Being able to basically leave your weaponry in your victims means that you don't have any need to be able to grapple or slash them. With the same line of logic, I removed the sickle claw from this design completely. Maybe this indicates that the toe was lost to make for more efficient running, or perhaps that Gendrome are a prey species that only recently turned predator. I'm really happy with this more bizarre design. I had wilds in mind when I created it, and I feel like this totally fits in with the freaks we're seeing from that game. If you want to hear my opinions on the designs they've showed us, you should check out the Discord server that I'm shamelessly plugging right now. What do you know? I was able to get an episode out during the school year. Yeah, but I don't know if I will get this chance again. I was just lucky to get enough time off to work on this one. I did intend to make colored art of the minion monsters to put in the background of the scene here, but I decided that the composition was cluttered enough, and like with subspecies, I want to talk about small monsters in their own capacity, probably in a mini-series at the end of the generation. Certainly not because I was lazy, of course not. How dare you? As per usual, I plan to cover monsters in the order of introduction to the series, but if there's a monster you really want to see, make sure to reply to my pinned comment below with your vote. Or give someone else who voted for the same monster a like so it's easier to tell how popular the choice is. Also, feel free to give me your feedback. I'm always looking to improve as an artist and as an editor. While you're at it, make sure to crush that subscribe, slash that like, and detonate all the other buttons the algorithm demands. Happy hunting!